particular panel session on incentivizing the private sector. And I have just learned a few moments ago that Dorothea, one of our panelists, came up with the title for this particular session, this particular panel, and we would like to thank her for it, because we're talking about public-private partnerships. And one of the things that was very apparent this morning, to get the private sector involved takes some doing on the part of public organizations, that not necessarily are all private organizations just waiting to have an opportunity to go forward. So we are going to talk about different ways of generating interest on both sides and how it can work together. And we have a very interesting 5-member panel here with varied backgrounds, and I think you'll really appreciate the different perspectives that they're going to bring to public-private partnerships. And our first speaker this afternoon will be Dorothea, and Dorothea has a very interesting background. She is really interested in polar issues, and she has a degree in political science, but she's also involved in all of the other things to do with what happens to the polar situations, Antarctica and Arctica, and looking at the conflict and the negotiation that needs to go on there. She holds a doctorate degree in political science, and she works as a researcher at the German Development Institute. And I'm going to stop talking and let Dorothea take over now. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Beverlee, for this kind introduction, and also many thanks to the conference organizers for inviting me to participate. I'm very honored to have the opportunity presenting some of my research today. And just as a question of organizational matters, I brought a presentation. I don't know if it is possible to put it on, perhaps. That might be helpful. No, that's not mine. Unfortunately not. It's the other one. The other one named Dorothea Wehrmann, after my name.
This morning we had a little bit of delay due to flights cancellations. This afternoon, a little bit of delay due to technical problems.
In the presentation, I want to talk particularly about the challenges that come along with the aim to incentivize private sector engagement in multi-actor partnerships for sustainable developments. And as we already heard this morning, and as we are all very familiar with, in the current discussion on the implementation of the Agenda 2030, it is a very popular narrative that particularly resources and knowledge from private sector actors are needed to implement the Agenda 2030. However, there are various challenges that come along with the intended inclusion of private sector actors in development cooperation, of which I will discuss particularly 3 by posing 3 questions. First, whom to partner with. Second, how to organize, structure, and implement partnerships. And third, how to incentivize private sector actors. Starting with the first challenge, whom to partner with. It's very unfortunate that the presentation is not there, I assume. No? Okay, well, that's fine. So starting with the first question, whom to partner with, the term private sector actors embraces very different actors, as we all know, such as private and state-owned companies, stakeholder-owned businesses, social businesses, philanthropies, small and medium-sized enterprises, micro-enterprises, and multinational corporations. However, oftentimes, multi-actor partnerships relate to private sector actors in very general terms. For example, when aiming at scaling up private sector engagement leveraged through development cooperation, as is, for example, a central objective of the Global Partnership for the Effective Development Cooperation in its current program of work. So without clarifying what kind of private sector actors are meant under this objective, this is quite problematic, because depending on the sectors in which so-called private sector actors operate, and on their structure, also their interest and means to engage in the field of development cooperation differ. Multinational companies, for example, such as Unilever, have different resources to engage in development cooperation. And for Unilever, its global reputation is more important than, for example, for rather micro or small-sized companies who are based in countries that are still struggling to improve their infrastructure and basic needs. So incentivizing strategies that do not consider the heterogeneity of private sector actors thus either remain very general and abstract, while they need to be explicit to be successful, because private sector actors are more likely to engage in development cooperation initiatives if these initiatives come along with concrete benefits for them. This brings me to the second challenge, how to organize, structure, and implement partnerships. In the past, it is particularly the effectiveness of multi-actor partnerships, and here I include public-private partnerships, that has often been proven limited. So when intending to enhance the engagement of private sector actors in development cooperation, a central challenge is to organize, structure, and implement partnerships in a way that enhances the effectiveness of such partnerships and in the end really serves and supports the implementation of the Agenda 2030. There are various definitions of partnerships that already show that partnerships with private sector actors can be understood and structured very differently. I prepared some slides that should summarize the main characteristics often ascribed to multi-actor partnerships, and particularly it is this term, multi-actor partnership, that is also envisioned under SDG 17 and the Agenda 2030, which also leave this very open. So just to quote from the Agenda 2030 and from the SDG 17, multi-stakeholder partnerships are defined in this, under this goal as partnerships that mobilize and share knowledge, expertise, technology, and financial resources to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in all countries, in particular developing countries. And here it is referred particularly to public, private, and civil society partnerships. But it is still left open what kind of sectors and branches are addressed. Of course, in the Agenda 2030, this has to be rather general, but it is the task for the political practitioners in the respective settings then to make this concrete and explicit. So in general, from the literature, from the academic debate, it is often, the multi-actor partnerships are often considered as such if they are composed of at least 3 different governmental, non-governmental, and private sectors actors. And they are classified according to the target groups they address, according to their mandate and objectives and their structures. Multi-stakeholder platforms, on the other hand, constitute one specific type of multi-actor partnerships. So as a network, they are composed of different individual actors and multi-actor partnerships. They address a problem shared by all collaborating partners and focus on the provision of services to support multi-actor partnerships. Similar to multi-actor partnerships, multi-stakeholder platforms differ in view of the sectors and objectives they address, the management structures, the services they provide, and their scope. And under consideration of these definitions, typologies of multi-actor partnerships and platforms differ. For example, as multi-actor partnerships can be grouped according to the services they provide and their scope. And I listed on the slide some exemplary multi-actor partnerships that are linked to UN agencies and that illustrate South-South and triangular cooperation, which we are not able to see now, but it is possible to either group them, as I said, according to these services and their scope, or also according to the objectives that relate to the SDGs explicitly. So under consideration of these differences, to improve the effectiveness of multi-actor partnerships and to incentivize the inclusion of private sector actors in development cooperation who, again, prefer concrete outcomes and for whom the effectiveness of partnerships is thus also crucial, various recommendations have been provided by scholarly analysis in the field of development cooperation. Particularly, it's 4 central actions that have been repeatedly mentioned in the literature. Multi-actor partnerships should first clarify the roles private sector actors are expected to perform. Second, encourage transparent and inclusive dialogues. Third, select the most suitable private sector actors considering the objectives of multi-actor partnerships. And fourth, clarify and specify regulating frameworks early on. The implementation of these central actions, however, does not occur out of the blue, of course, but requires institutional oversight, or meta-governance, as global governance researchers often call it. In practice, this means that to increase the effectiveness, multi-actor partnerships need to be somehow institutionalized. This can mean that they have a secretariat that bundles and disseminates information and organizes regular exchanges among all actors engaged in the respective multi-actor partnership. Or that multi-actor partnerships are linked to a platform or a wider network that serves similarly as a focal point, such as the UN Global Compact. However, as global governance researchers further point out, any kind of meta-governance need to be adapted to context-specific conditions under which multi-actor partnerships and the actors engaged in such partnerships operate. And there we have the presentation. Fantastic, thank you. Now we need to, just in time.
Just in time.
Yeah, I think we need to go further. Thank you. Yeah, these would be the characteristics, but we can go back to that later in the Q&A. Yeah. Even more. That's fine. We can stay here. Thank you so much. So the meta-governance needs to be adapted to context-specific conditions under which multi-actor partnerships and the actors engaged operate in order to be effective. This means, for example, that secretariats or networks need to be aware of the different means and viewpoints of collaborating actors that shape their engagement in sustainable development initiative. Not all actors, for instance, may be able to attend meetings regularly organized or planned by secretariats or to submit information demanded in evaluation processes. Maybe move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Coming to challenge number 3 now, and to the last challenge, and to the question how to incentivize private sector actors to engage in development cooperation explicitly. From what I presented in regard to the previous 2 challenges, we can already derive at 2 conclusions. First, it is necessary to adapt incentivizing, thank you, oh, great, incentivizing strategies individually to the private sector actors whose collaboration is envisioned, for example, by considering information gained from stakeholder dialogues at the local level. And second, it is much needed to take advantage of a proper meta-governance to improve the effectiveness of multi-actor partnerships, for example, by encouraging knowledge exchange and monitoring. In order to outline, however, what is in for the private sector actors that when engaging in development cooperation, and oftentimes it is particularly the access to emerging economies that is mentioned in this regard, it is similarly important to consider the specific multi-actor partnership, their scope and focus areas, and the specific private sector actors engaged in these multi-actor partnerships. Accordingly, and instead of outlining a bullet point or a shopping list of incentives that would have to remain rather abstract in general when referring to private sector actors in general, or limited to a small number of private sector actors or multi-actor partnerships investigated in detail, I would like to end this presentation by giving a voice to private sector actors themselves and to those who have been collaborating with them in the past, and to outline various disincentives that need to be considered and limited by those envisioning to incentivize the engagement of private sector actors in development cooperation. And so we were talking a lot about the time before. Yes. I will try to stick to my time limit and just read out some of the quotes from the interviews that I conducted in the past months. And I'm very happy to discuss them further in the Q&A later on. So here we read some of the statements from the interviews. There are already many partnerships that often exist, but often it is not clear how these partnerships relate to each other and what they actually do. Many seem to duplicate efforts. This is the opinion of one interview. Another said, businesses are reluctant to contribute to a platform that is just about chatting. A third one said, businesses are very cautious about whether or not the collaboration is of use for them at all because of the costs and uncertainties that relate to commitments. Further, they fear the damage of their reputational capital if they dissolve the partnership. Another said, often there are institutional hindrances that limit the effectiveness of collaboration in multi-actor partnerships and with platforms. For example, if chairs change and focus areas are changed because of reputational interests. Another said, businesses do not collaborate in partnerships or with platforms if they worry that the bad reputation of partners or the missing implementation of activities will damage their own image. And last but not least, multi-actor partnerships change, and the motivation and interests of actors to collaborate change, as well as do also the external circumstances under which multi-actor partnerships operate. It is difficult to identify the most suitable partnership for actors interested in sustainable development initiatives accordingly. And herewith I'd like to end, and thank you very much for your attention. And once again, thanks to Beverlee and to Pirzer for organizing this.
Thank you, Joel. Next on the agenda, we will have Christian Pirzer, and he's project manager and a consultant for Endeva. And one of the things that he was talking about over lunch, that he did not have an economic background, but he thought that it gave him a different perspective. But I think he really has a marketing background, because when I read his biography, it starts off, I'm a passionate and results-oriented private sector development professional. Now that is a marketing person if I ever saw one. So Christian, we will let you talk about your experience, and you can tell a bit about your company and what you do going along with it.
Thanks a lot, Beverlee, and also thanks a lot for the organizers and for inviting us here. It's an honor to speak for you, or in front of you, and I'm also happy to answer Q&As later on, even after the session, if some of you has a question or so. I think I can feed in nicely to what Dorothea said, because like through the experiences that I, as a consultant, also working with development partners and with businesses, know from a practical and implementation perspective. So moving a little bit from this academic view into the practical implementation view of multi-stakeholder platforms and collaborations. And I think I would specifically like to talk about two types of partnerships. One is the corporate partnerships, as we define it, between NGOs and private sector. And the other is multi-sector platforms or multi-sector partnerships, similar to what Dorothea was talking about. A quick background to the company I work for. We are based in Berlin, and we do consulting for businesses on how to become more inclusive and sustainable. So how to integrate low-income people into their economic value chains. We also work a lot with development partners and donors on how to create what we call inclusive business ecosystems. So the enabling business environment for social enterprises, inclusive businesses, companies to reach their full potential. And I think especially in that type of work, we do a lot of incentivizing the private sector. So we create specific incentives on bringing private sector into the game. And one of these examples that I also want to share with you, some experiences or some learnings, is a program that we are doing with UNDP, with the Regional Service Center for Sub-Saharan Africa. It is a innovative, multi-stakeholder collaboration approach in 3 countries. We work in Uganda in the tourism sector. We work in Senegal in the renewable energy sector. And we work in Lesotho in the mobile banking, digital finance sector. And this is very different regions, very different sectors, but what all of that has in common is that we are trying to transform the sectors towards more inclusiveness and sustainability. So, for example, just to make it very concrete, in Lesotho, we are working with the big mobile network operators and the big banks, so Vodacom, Econet, Standard Bank, etc., and the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, etc., on bringing mobile banking into the rural areas of Lesotho. So here we have a case, and this comes basically to my first point, my first point that I want to make, that incentives need to be aligned. If incentives are not aligned, private sector collaboration or inclusion of private sector doesn't really work. Here, in this case, in the case of Lesotho, we have this alignment because everyone, the Ministry of Finance, they want to get financial education into the rural areas. Vodacom, the banks want to get into the game. They want to be part of the profits that they can make with mobile banking. But the big MNOs, they want to expand. They want to increase profits. They want to make more money by having more people as a target group. So everyone, all these different stakeholders have the same goal. They want to bring mobile banking into the rural areas. And this is a situation or circumstances where I think, from my experience or from our experience, private sector collaboration and these multi-stakeholder approaches can work. I think another point that I wanted to make that I find very important, especially in the work with NGOs, but also that I've seen working with UNDP is, and I'm not sure if that analogy is okay, but that I see in relationships. So if you, as a person, are not fully, let's say, comfortable with your own strength, or convinced about your own strength and your assets that you bring into a relationship, this has a negative influence on a relationship. And you are insecure, you don't know what to expect, you don't know what the others are expecting. And this is something that I've seen a lot working with NGOs, that when they collaborate with the private sector, they are not fully aware of their USP, of their unique selling point, of their value added in the relationship. And this creates an imbalance in the relationship. So I think as a recommendation there, before engaging with the private sector, social organizations should really sit and think about what their specific value added is. And they have a lot. So, for example, an international NGO has a very big distribution network. They are all over the world. They have really high quality, good people. So they have a lot of assets that they can bring into a partnership. It's just about how to communicate that. And for example, with UNDP, in this case of the partnerships that I was talking about, UNDP plays the role as a facilitator. This is something that UNDP is extremely good at. No other player in the world, I would say, can bring together governments, private sector, other players in that setting. So UNDP knows their USP, their assets, and that's what they bring into the partnership, and that's what makes a partnership work. I have another, like a couple of short 2 minutes. Some comments that I had on multi-sector stakeholder platforms, and I fully agree with what she said about who to partner with. So you need to find the right partner, and when you do the when you to know how to organize a private sector partnership, what we found is that it is crucial to include the private sectors in the design of the partnership. And this is again to just align with their own incentives. If that is not the case, if they are brought in after the project or the partnership is designed, then they will not be able to bring in their unique strengths, because yeah. And another thing that I found very interesting when I read what Dorothea was writing, is that I'm strongly recommend to go with the ones that are willing and to walk the talk. So meaning, if one private sector organization is willing to bring a topic forward and willing to contribute and bring in, we need to go with that. We of course need to be inclusive for others to align with that, but otherwise, when we wait for everyone to be in this partnership, for everyone to move at the same pace, we will not be able to move. So it is okay to move faster with some, and others with the private sector, if they see that in my case again, if Vodacom sees that Econet does something great and that Econet is in this partnership, they will also jump on board. They are just waiting because they are not fully convinced that this is a business case. Collaboration with the public sector. But when you show that to them, they will jump on board as soon as they can. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, marketing is my discipline, so I'm a pretty good judge. Okay, next we will have Agustin Delgado, and he is the Chief Innovation and Sustainability Officer. I'm very impressed with that title, by the way. Yes. At Iberdola in Madrid, Spain. And one of the things, he comes with a background in industrial engineering, which is a very different background from our previous two speakers. And he's going to give us his perspective on public-private partnerships. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverlee, for this kind introduction, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to give my thought about how a company, a big corporation like us, can somehow use the agenda of the SDGs as a lever for our own businesses. So just a few notes about Iberdola. We are one of the leaders in renewable energies in the world. We operate in Spain, UK, US, Mexico, and Brazil. And we have a lot of wind energy, solar, and hydro assets, plus some others. Okay? So we had, in the past, we have evolved our concept of sustainability with time. At the very beginning, we used to have like a social responsibility department, as many others, and this is still ongoing. But at some point, we thought that there is an opportunity and a challenge for the industry, for our industry, for the electricity sector, to develop new solutions that the world needs for our energy system. We all may agree that our energy system is not sustainable anymore. So we have to change how we produce and use our energy, and we as an energy company are committed to do so. And we can do that through new business models and through innovation. That's why my title is Innovation and Sustainability, because we think that we have to achieve these two things together, right? So we were in this process. We have our sustainability policy that, in our case, incorporates what sustainability means for our sector, and it means, for sure, environmental concerns, CO2 emissions, but also affordability. We cannot deliver energy that is very clean, but it's not affordable to our customers, because people need to have access to energy. And this is very clear in the SDG 7. And we also think that we need to provide security of supply and quality of supply. There is no energy if you only have energy 2 hours a day. So these three things should come together, and the solutions we look for should have those three things. Besides, we also think that we have to do this in a responsible manner with all our stakeholders, and as we are a company, a private company, we should also deliver to our shareholders dividends. So there is no harm on doing this by also doing business, and this is what we are trying to do. So then it comes a few years ago, the 2030 agenda, and we strongly believe that this gives us like a roadmap and a framework to develop our previous thoughts. And we did so. So we integrate the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, in our sustainability policy. So it helps us to identify and manage risk, cost, new markets, innovation, and we aligned all these new things in our strategy. So we incorporated them, and we thought that we cannot do the whole 17, but we should focus on what we can do. And as an energy company, we thought we should focus on 2. It's 7, providing a clean, affordable energy access to people, and 13, because we are one of the main contributors of CO2 in the world, combating climate change. And then we align all our strategy with that. So we are committed in the SDG 7, energy access, renewable energy efficiency. We have targets, and I think this is very important. You can talk whatever you want, but if you don't have targets and you don't have those targets somehow tracked, then you are doing just talking, right? So we have targets in all these objectives. So from since 2000, we have invested 90 billion euros in renewables. And our new strategy plan for 2022, it is about 35 billion euros, mostly in renewables and networks, because we think networks is completely needed for this quality of supply I was saying before. We have the target for energy efficiency, to improve the energy efficiency of our customers through electric vehicles, through energy efficiency at home, and through electric heating with heat pumps. And we have also a target for energy access. We have committed to, for 2020, it was done in the United Nations in New York, 4 million new persons having access through our networks, thanks to us. So I think this talks up very well about our compromise in the SDG number 7. And for the 13, we have 3 clear targets. For 2020, to decrease our emissions 30%. For 2030, 50%. And for 2050, carbon neutral. So having in mind that we are already, as we have invested so much in renewables, we are already 30% below the average in Europe. So, and we are making money out of it. And this is the good point of everything, because and it's not only making money, but the financial community and the investor community, and we have a panel after that about this, is more and more asking us about these kind of things and how we are going to do businesses in this new framework that is coming. And you may see the graphs of the price for shares for those companies that still have coal in the portfolio, and the coal companies that are decreasing very much because investors doesn't trust on the sustainability of the business anymore. So it is not that we have to do this in the future because it's good, it's in the SDG agenda, but it's also that investors and financial community are backing those companies that will provide the sustainability in the future. So for us, it's not only sustainability in the sense of the United Nations framework, but also sustainability of the business. And I think this is really great. So this is the most important thing we are doing. It is, we have taken this so much that the bonus of our directors, my bonus, the bonus of the chairman, is linked to achievement of the targets. So this shows how the commitment is. So 20% of the bonus for 2020 is linked to the achievement of these targets I'm talking about. So, but we also want to help our somehow environment around us, our suppliers, our customers, and so on, to know about this. So we also have a strong awareness program about SDGs. So we have created an alliance with universities in Spain and with the Secretaría General Iberoamericana, the Ibero-American General Secretary. So we're going to have to celebrate a huge conference in Salamanca, in Spain, Ibero-American Conference on SDGs. So we are somehow letting people know what the SDG are and what opportunities the SDG will provide to different businesses, and also we're telling them to commit, as we have done so far, and letting them know how they can be in a business, commit to these sustainable development goals. So through this conference and some other things we are doing, like being here, we are trying also to share with others what we are doing, learning from others what they are doing, and somehow trying to create a momentum and an awareness of what SDG could mean for business. We have also introduced in our status what is the concept of social dividend. So for our shareholders, we have our annual General Assembly next week, on Friday this week, and we are going to tell our shareholders what is the dividend in terms of money and what is our social dividend also. So they feel that the company they have invested is giving them money because of their investment, but it's also providing the society with the mission we say in our website, that is providing clean, affordable energy, security of supply to our customers. And this is really what we are thinking. What we think about is, it's really, for us, it's been like a big opportunity because we really think electricity will be in the center of this. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, you have already heard this morning if you were here in session, but then Angus spoke for his boss, who was not able to get here due to the Lufthansa strike. This afternoon, he's going to be speaking for himself. Angus Rene is Senior Manager at the United Nations Global Compact, and one of the things he's going to, his background, by the way, is law. So therefore, we've had an industrial engineer, we've had a political scientist, we've had a variety of different backgrounds, but this is the first one with a law background that we have. And he's going to talk about a study that the Compact did, the UN Global Compact Accenture Strategy CEO study, Transforming Partnerships for Sustainable Development Goals, and I believe that's what you're going to do. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Beverlee. I hope you won't hold it against me that I have a background in law, but you know, no one's perfect anyway. It's a pleasure to be here, and in addition to the remarks I conveyed on behalf of Lisa Kingo, share some highlights from a recent study of CEOs that the Global Compact, CEO study that the Global Compact undertook with Accenture, part of a series of over a decade of reports that we've produced with Accenture Strategy. I think this is on point in terms of us unpacking what are the incentives of business engagement in partnerships for the SDGs. So just to frame this year's report, I'll back up to 2016. The CEO study that year focused on understanding businesses' reactions to the SDGs. You know, how were companies adapting to the new landscape? And there were some really helpful insights from that study with nearly 1,000 CEOs surveyed. 95% felt that they had a personal responsibility to ensure their companies had a core purpose and a role in society. And we're hearing more and more about companies feeling purpose-driven, which aligns well with the SDGs. 80% in that survey said that demonstrating a commitment to societal purpose was already differentiating them in their industry as a company. And 87% saw the SDGs already, this is 2016, as an essential opportunity to rethink their approaches to creating value as a company for shareholders and for the broader community. 85%, very encouraging, also saw cross-sector efforts as really critical to enabling us to make progress on the SDGs. So with that understanding, in 2017, we shifted focus and wanted to look at UN leadership and develop a better understanding of the landscape of the UN in terms of its ability to take up business, which is increasingly really quite interested in the SDGs. So we asked UN leadership across the UN system and over 30 entities participating, what will it take to scale up partnerships to bring about the kind of transformations we need to see to create impact on the SDGs. And we found some pretty interesting results which very much align with a lot of the work that the inspector and his team at the JIU undertook around the same time. So it's, as I said this morning, it's great to see us pulling in the same direction, drawing similar observations and you know, really having shared perspective. So a lot of this will be familiar to those of you who've read some of the other materials being shared today. So across the board, UN leaders feel that more effort is needed to engage with the private sector given this growing interest, 100% in fact. But against this backdrop of real goodwill and intention, very few actually believe that their organizations are currently doing enough to leverage the interest of the private sector. And there are some key barriers that we need to address. And again, much of this should be familiar to you. Skill sets and capability gaps, resource constraints, which prohibit us from or hold us back from exploring really new, innovative, transformational partnership models and keep us in sort of older modes of interaction focused more on philanthropy. Restrictive legal policies and procedures, and we've heard this from a few private sector participants, that can sometimes create undue delays which really disincentivize the private sector from engaging. Cultural differences, and this is a difficult one. It's sometimes the elephant in the room, but there's still a lot of discomfort with the idea that businesses can be motivated by profitability and still be advancing the SDGs. So this is something that we need to be ever mindful of and do more to address. So given these kind of challenges, traditional approaches, unfortunately, are still quite persistent. There are, we estimate, more than 1,500 active UN business partnerships across the system, but most of them are bilateral arrangements, so not yet scaled up, not yet sufficiently multi-stakeholder, often with just one corporate partner, and often lasting less than 5 years. So we need to lengthen our time horizons and engage a much broader ecosystem if we're to see the transformations that we really need to have. So how do we do that? How do we transform and scale? Well, a majority of the UN does agree we need to move to longer-term strategic partnerships, and they know that to do that, we need to more effectively measure, track, and communicate the value of engaging with the UN. We need to define clearer value propositions for our corporate partners and ensure that we communicate internally and externally the value of collaboration to really build momentum and develop solutions together that we just couldn't in isolation. A lot of this energy and this strategic direction needs to go towards innovative financing mechanisms. Again, across the board, most UN entities recognize that we need to explore innovative financing, engaging the private sector on financing for development, but there's an urgent need to build new skill sets and expertise to realize these goals. There are a lot of examples in the partnership report that I won't have time to go into, but I encourage you to read it. We didn't print the report. It's just available digitally on the Global Compact website, but in all regions with a number of different UN agencies and different companies, great examples. And drawing from those, we've tried to put together some guidance, a roadmap for business leaders to try to help them navigate the UN collaboration space and scale their collaboration and impact. So at each stage of the partnership cycle, we hope that ideas that we offer can help companies and the UN have partnership success. So the I of identifying is, as we heard from Iberdola, figuring out which SDGs are most relevant. And so for business leaders, that's important. And for partnership practitioners, supporting that, helping companies identify resources that can help them navigate the SDGs is critical. The D of develop. For business leaders, ensuring that you're cultivating partnership champions and empowering staff to really support collaboration is critical. Time and again in preparing this study, we heard that without specific individuals championing partnerships, it's very hard for partnerships to survive and thrive. And for partnership practitioners on the UN side and in other sectors as well, echoing what Christian said, knowing your strengths, so doing an inventory, understanding your value proposition, being very clear about what you offer to prospective corporate partners. And we recommend doing a partnership readiness assessment, really a 360 of your organization to understand your capabilities, where your gaps may lie, and outline clear internal processes for managing partnerships. And then the E is engaging, so encouraging in particular corporate leaders to continue to engage with UN leaders to build that momentum and further those relationships. And for partnership practitioners, making sure that there's alignment on specific objectives and KPIs and regular communications. We heard a number of instances of partnerships with the best of intentions that unfortunately go off the rails just due to the simple fact that the different actors involved weren't checking in with each other enough. So it sounds simple, but it's really important not to forget. And take action, maintaining those kinds of regular follow-ups on the part of business leaders, empowering partnership teams, setting expectations, supporting a risk management approach, but also ensuring there's flexibility and an ability to sort of change according to the winds. For partnership practitioners, ensuring that you're really mapping progress against KPIs. Unfortunately, in the UN system, this remains a rarity in terms of best practice, and it's critical to ensure we maintain momentum and succeed. So internalizing for business leaders the partnership methodologies and learnings and trying to mainstream them through your business models to ensure that you are creating that scale that we desperately need to achieve Agenda 2030. And for partnership practitioners, communicating the impact once you've measured it via KPIs, illustrative anecdotes, events like this, making sure that internal and external stakeholders understand the value of partnership and we build support for this work. And this is really critical to do on an ongoing basis and refreshing the business case and the value proposition as on the ground conditions continue to evolve quite dramatically. So we hope that this framework is helpful for colleagues both in the UN, in business, and in other sectors to sort of have a refreshed approach to the way we collaborate and to take partnerships to the next level. Thanks very much, Beverlee.
Thank you, Angus. Last but definitely not least, we have Rajendra Joel, and he's the Executive Director of the Sustainable Development Global Partnership Association. And one of the things about him is he is a true Renaissance man. His master's in economics and political science, but he says his interests are philosophy, arts, human ecosystem development. So that is a true Renaissance person, if there ever was one. And so he's going to be talking about the awards, the SDG Global Award and Acceleration Program. Is that correct? And you're going to be talking about that. So that's a good way to sort of bring closure to this, about the award you can get for doing good work.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, panelists. After listening to most of my panelists, which I honor and respect fully, and here we are at the United Nations, you know, possibly on the verge of a larger war than the proxy one which is going on currently in Syria, I think we have to get real with a lot of the ideas that we may have in terms of how we're going to move forward and actually achieve the SDGs. I like the word partnerships, private-public partnerships. I think it's great. It's a good metaphor in many areas. But I could also use another metaphor in the sense, like, you know, governments are like shepherds, companies are like wolves, and the rest of us are like sheep. Now, so I hope that woke you up a little bit, in the sense that private sector has to be constrained. They're looking for profits. They're looking for scenarios where they have low risk profile to make a lot of profits for their shareholders. So we don't need to teach them what to do to make money. Now, what we need to do is to ensure that governments can collaborate with the private sector in a way to constrain their profitability and excessive profitability in many cases, so that they can give back to society in the best way possible. A lot of the large companies that we talk about in very good successes of public-private partnerships don't even pay taxes in their jurisdiction. So they shift their money around from one state to another, and so on and so forth. So what does it mean, coming back to this topic of incentivizing the private sector, incentivizing public-private partnerships? Well, you know, it's like how do we use this love-hate relationship of this very difficult couple that has to work together? How do we, you know, find the synergies and the best practices so that we can actually achieve the goals that, you know, that the member states have signed upon in 2015 to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, or like our young friend Lena said, hopefully before. I think that the current process of, you know, what the private sector could do, how they could engage, you know, somehow it's an unnecessary conversation, because we need to learn to constrain their development more than encourage further profitability. So governments have a mandate towards their citizens. Private sector has a mandate to their shareholders and possibly to their consumers. Possibly, you know, I mean, to a certain extent, yes, but not always. As we see with Facebook and the releasing of data and so on and so forth, and Google and so on and so forth. I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in NGOs, I've worked within the UN government, United Nations organization systems, and I try to understand, are we ready to achieve the SDGs? You know, what is required to move forward? And I think that chances are there will be a lot more talk, a lot more conferences like this one, which I think is very important to have. But I think that we are not going to get there unless we know how to accelerate the process, how to scale up, how to replicate good practices. And for that, I had imagined and discussed with many different organizations, including the Joint Inspection Unit, how an award system and an accelerator system could actually help benefit. Because when private sector wants to work with the UN, basically they want the UN label. You know, they want the UN brand so that they can enter new markets, reduce their risks, have a better perception with customers and business partners. So how do we use this label in a way that is productive to achieve the goals? You know, if we look at the corporate social responsibility of many companies, you know, including the ones which are terrible on the field in terms of deforestation and doing a lot of bad out there, but they always have very nice corporate social responsibility programs in education. Maybe they build a small school, and, you know, then they talk about this to their shareholders and publish it on the newspapers, and, you know, that creates their branding and their greenwashing. So I think here at the United Nations we need to be more clear about how to engage with the private sector. So the idea is to create a SDG global award program that will recognize and reward best practices based on evidence, based on the successes of how they have actually achieved what they say that they have achieved. It's not sufficient to say we have a corporate social responsibility program in education sector and we are part of the UN Global Compact and we would like to engage with the UN and with the governments, but we do not have the resources, or we have issues with what is a transformational model. It's not their job. Their transformational model is to increase the amount of dollars and cents into their bank accounts and that of their shareholders. It is the role of governments to steer this. To steer. It's the role of the United Nations to be able to steer the activities of the private sector. And I think it's possible. So by creating an award mechanism, which strangely enough, even within the United Nations, it's like a nice idea, but we might not want to get there because of politics. You know, if we give an award to person A from Brazil, perhaps person B from Netherlands might not be too happy because Brazil got the award and not Netherlands, you know. And because there are many different award programs within the UN currently, and it's very political. You know, the day before the awarding of a specific prize, people go up to your office room and say, hey, please, can you not do that, give that prize to person A or person B? Because it is very soft, a soft approach to awarding rather than data-driven, rather than evidence-driven. And I think that's where we have to get to. We have to be able to collect data. If we cannot see things from data, then I think we are missing the point of achieving the SDGs and the targets. So we have the targets, which is it's a great framework, and everybody has bought onto the framework. And now it's how do we, collect the data? For governments, for example, governments are required to publish or to do a report. It's called the voluntary report. National Review Voluntary Report, which this year 44 countries had filed in their voluntary review, but the voluntary reviews are not structured enough, so they're not intercomparable. So we do not know what works here if we can replicate over there. What works here, can we scale it? So it's still voluntary. We're still at the emerging stages. It's like, how cool are you? I'm cool. But, so is she great? Yeah, she's great. But, we can't measure, we can't hold, we can't have tangible elements. And for many, many reasons. And if you even look up some of the work published by the United Nations Joint Inspection Unit, 2017, Results-Based Management in the United Nations System, a high-impact model for results-based management, benchmarking, framework, stages of development, and outcomes. The reason why they did that, because even the United Nations system-wide organizations are not really on the ball of actually working with results-based management strategies to, it's like, so it's still weak. We're still weak on the data. Another report is the knowledge management within the United Nations system. Why? Because it's very weak. So another report is on the role of service centers in redesigning administrative service delivery. Another one is on donor-led assessments. In 5 years, there were around 800 assessments by donor countries who basically fund the United Nations to check on how well are you using your money. The European Union, I can see the European Union sitting over there, is one of the largest funders outside the United States of America, who've pulled out a lot from the United Nations systems, is a big funder. And how do we know that we are getting the best value for the money? How do we know that the programs we put into place have real, concrete steps achieving towards the Sustainable Development Goals, apart from cosmetics and nice wishes and nice to haves? So I believe that there are many types of partners. There are many types of private sectors, as Dorothy had. There are many types of UN organizations. There are many types of international government organizations. In many cases, Davos is doing much better job at some things than some United Nations organizations, and that's part of it's business, part of it is an international government organization. In many ways, perhaps some corporate social responsibility programs of large companies are doing much better than potentially some of the UN agencies work on the field. How do we know? What do we measure? How do we recognize them? How do we reward them? How do we scale them up? How do we replicate? How do we accelerate? If we had $1 trillion, which the United States of America obviously doesn't have right now, where would we put this $1 trillion to really make an impact so that we can achieve the SDGs? We don't know. We don't even know how those relationships are going to play out to actually make it happen. So that is really why, in a very nutshell, why I think that we have to work towards evidence-based, collect data from the best use cases, from the best practices of private sector, of the UN system-wide organizations, of NGOs. Let them tell us what are they doing towards the SDGs, and let them prove to us the value of what they are doing. And if that value is the best value we can see today, let's give them an award, and let's make sure that their best practice can be shared to other member states, and let's make sure that that best practice can be accelerated and scaled and so on and so forth. So I rest my case for over there.
I now see why you wanted to go last. That was his request. He suggested that he go last, and I now understand the purpose behind it. I think that gives us all something to think about. And everyone stuck to the timeline, so congratulations, all of you. So we have ample time for questions from anyone who has questions of any of the panelists that you would like elaboration on or questions. Okay, yes, Mr. Sudan.
Simple question. I mean, obviously, private sector is not a charity. They are business. Is there any place for social responsibilities of the private sector in a capitalist economy? And this is just a question for everybody there. Do you think these two are actually consistent? You want social responsibility from the private sector towards us, and at the same time you are running fully capitalist system.
I would give it a go. This is why I use the word constrain. We have to learn how to constrain these organizations. For example, if we look at the telecom industry in Africa, a lot of money. The telecom industry was a very, very profitable business. Where does the money go? Where do the profits go? Many of them go back to their homeland countries, and some of the countries have managed to say, okay, we want a 50-50, that the nation would also hold a stake in the company so that it can hold a stake in the profits. And then you have other countries like Ethiopia, which does not allow the private sector to play, so that it knows that that's a profitable business, so that it can use its profits for the further development, sustainable development of the country. So this is why I use the word constraints. This is why the governments are like the shepherds. You want to protect the sheep, so you have to learn to keep the wolves away. They will come, they will play, but how do you engage with them would be, I think, the secret model of excellent private-public partnership.
Antonio, do you hear me? Antonio Hautle from the United Nations Global Compact Local Network Switzerland. So Global Compact Network Switzerland. Rajiv, Rajinder, thank you for the provocation. I think it's important, now we're getting into the discussion. You will not be astonished that partly I completely agree with you and partly I completely disagree. Because if I'm hearing to Mr. Delgado, I realize there are big companies who understood they can't go on the way we did in the last 200 years, more or less, externalizing all costs to the public and not internalizing them. That's the first step. And that's why we from the UN Global Compact define sustainability always on the triple bottom line. The first purpose of a company, they must be profitable, otherwise they will not sustain. But they have on an equal level to be ecologically and socially sustainable. And there we have the big challenges. I agree with the tax issues, but it's much more complicated. We are always focusing on the 10 to 15% of big transnational companies. Sorry, they make some 30% of the global GNP. The big challenge is with the local informal sector and formal sector, which makes 70%. And we didn't speak at all about this issue. And I completely disagree that you say you have to control from the state. You can do it. We try it since, 100 years? We do not succeed. And I would like to go into discussions. There is not a simple solution. I agree the role of the state is important. The role of the UN is important. But look what is happening. We have a corrupt regime. I don't call the names of the countries. We had elections in Europe. We had elections a little bit further east. And there we know that the state clan is controlling 70 to 90% of the economy. And there are the big, big issues. I agree that lots of companies have to be taken much more responsible for what they are doing. And in Switzerland, we are still much too weak. There I completely agree. But if we start to speak in the way to blame the companies who are willing to engage, we will be completely out of the game and we will not have any progress on that level.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this comment that I fully agree with. I mean, I also, as he said, I also agree with the role of the government and the government that the government has to play. But I really want to make clear that it's not one private sector. And I mean, you are very well aware of that. But just like as an example from the work that we do, and I mean, I work a lot with companies, with businesses, and we specifically call that inclusive business to differentiate us from CSR or something where basically you do something bad and then you do something good to greenwash. We call it inclusive business because it's what we try to do is on the core of the business. So it's about making profit and doing good. And this is possible. And just to name a couple of, I mean, you can find it in every sector, but I just want to name one sector, the tourism sector, and the work that we do in Uganda. Again, this UNDP project I was talking about before. There we work with small and medium-sized enterprises, so it's not multinationals. I fully agree with what you were saying. I mean, it's 70% SMEs that are responsible for creating jobs. We work with them to source locally from their local communities, because what they are doing at the moment is they buy from the capital. They get all the produce from the capital because the local communities that surround the lodges or areas, they are not capable of producing the right quality, the right quantity at the right time. So they have a high interest to source locally because it is less risky for them. The transportation value chain, it's cheaper, and they can brand their products. And I mean, you mentioned customers before, and I think what I've been seeing more and more is consumer awareness and a trend and a pressure on companies to go in that direction. And I think that's a key driver also for businesses to transform. Yeah.
Thank you, Christian. Other questions that you have? Yes, sir, I can't see. Netherlands, right?
I've got a question for Mrs. Wehrmann. Your research in platforms, did you do any research in digitization of those platforms? Because you were talking like partnership agreements, and could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, thank you very much for this question. Yeah, I was focusing particularly on the case of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation as a platform and partnership at the same time for outlining potentials or difficulties that such partnerships face when having this double role. I did not go into detail, or I did not do a comparison among different platforms that focus on digital linkages among partnerships. But of course, this is a very interesting field to look at, because this is some of the basic requirement that I think is needed in order to make sure that the existing partnerships are visible to those private sector actors who actually are interested in engaging in development cooperation initiatives. And there are some platforms that already have a very very comprehensive or kind of comprehensive web presence where you can see what partnerships do and that are updated regularly. But then on the other hand, it often is difficult to identify the explicit contributions that the actors engaged in these multi-actor partnerships that are linked to the platforms have done. So it is difficult to identify champions as private sector actors who could perhaps be engaged in other initiatives as well. This is a problem that I think still needs to be addressed by those platforms as well. Thank you.
Yes. You don't have your name. May I suggest for the future sessions you do get a card at least so someone can call on you by your country. If you have in the back of the room, so when you come in, because it's very difficult to say who you're trying to speak with. Yes.
Sarah Saad from Sudan, National Center for Research. My question is to the panel. Thank you for the presentation. But for the partnership between private and public in Africa, for Mr. Pirzer, who decides upon the projects done in each community? For example, mobile banking. Is it decided by the business partner or by the community itself? Because I think mobile banking now is not priority. Who decides on the priority of the project done there in each community?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. In the platforms that we set up as UNDP, we try to include the civil society and the communities as much as possible. So they are part of the steering committee of the platforms. So they have a say into, or they have a role to play and have a say in that decision. But I think at the end of the day, it's about the preferences that the stakeholders at the platform agree on. So if the government says this is a priority area, we need to go into that area, and then the private sector players say, okay, this is an area that is easily accessible, etc., etc., then the community says, oh, yes, please, but be careful of that and that. I think that's how these decisions are made. It's a little bit complex, right? So it's a negotiation process, but it's as inclusive as possible.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Delgado Jiflat from Algeria. I have just 2 points. One, to Mr. Delgado, is very impressed by the example, your illustrations. So it's very well done. You mentioned at one stage that the university was to some extent involved. I was going to ask how, in general, research sphere, does it have any had any role to play in the model you've developed, and how would you engage that in the future? Because that is very important. When new ideas and new models mature, perhaps you could elaborate on that. And the second one with Mr. Jhol, I was also very interested in your proposals. There are only 2 queries. One was raised by a friend. There are many countries which have a major data deficit. And if you work up this system, which is obviously will go in favor of those who have elaborate data collection systems. And the other one is there a lot of informality going into the south, and a lot of things more close to sustainability are going on. How can you overcome these 2 obstacles? Thank you.
So I'm taking the opportunity also to respond to the social responsibility question before, also because it's somehow linked. So in the past we had these programs for social responsibility, somehow doing things that was good for the society, but it was not linked to our business. So now we have changed our mind, and now we keep doing these kind of things, but linked to our business. So it's more about doing things that are not tangible, but intangible, and many of them relates to education. So we think that for our business, we need people, students that are educated in new forms of energy, new business development in the energy access and so on. So our social responsibility department, our foundation, is giving grants to students to get trained on these skills. Then we, as a business, somehow take some of them to work for us. So we linked our social responsibility programs to our business somehow, right? So this is the kind of things we are doing. Another social responsibility program we have, it is the Shire Alliance. We are delivering energy to a refugee camp in Ethiopia called Shire, sorry. And so we have our volunteers working on this field that is giving energy access to this field. So through that, we are learning how we can provide energy access in this environment, and probably in the future we develop a business out of that. So we link somehow our social responsibility programs with our probable or future business. If not, it's okay, but at least we try to do things in this regard. So going back to the university thing, we are doing something like this. So we have programs that goes from just making awareness, as I said before, about these kind of things. So we have programs for students to become entrepreneurs and helping them to think about challenges about the energy sector. So we have a huge program of with in Spain, ICAI, Strathclyde, in Scotland, MIT, in US, Tecnológico Monterrey, in Mexico, and we launch a challenge, energy challenge to the students. So then we pick all these ideas, and then we help them to develop the ideas, the best ones, and so on. And further, we make R&D projects with them to develop the skills that we need for these future things. And besides, there are some things that are not being taught in the university so far. So, for example, we are promoting a master in smart grids between two universities, Strathclyde and Comillas in Madrid, because those skills are not being trained. The students are not being trained on those skills so far. So we are promoting this. So we are concerned about our workforce, and we are using our university program for three things. First, to identify the best talent in university to work for us. Second, to train our own people in those skills that are needed. And third, to create collaborative project with them to define how the new energy sector is going to be. There is a huge need for new regulation and for the new energy system that is coming. It's not anymore like producing energy that is being demanded. It is about demanding energy that is being produced by renewables. Providing capacity is something totally different. And for example, we were one of the supporters of the Utility of the Future project from MIT that tried to highlight how an energy system and the electricity energy system in the future should work.
Hello, and congratulations about the Congress. I have a question for the participants. Danilo Sampaio from Federal University of Juiz de Fora, Brazil. Some issues do think about equality. Politicians come and go every 4 years, but the forests, the pastures, the rivers do not return. Food is not enough for the poor who do not have the money to pay the minimum, and exchange of knowledge about economic development between countries is still initial. PPPs occur in a small number in emerging countries. Would not it be an adjustment in the capitalist system that is about to actually implement SDGs? Are companies prepared for this adjustment and needs a review of the profits? Do politicians want sustainable development? And does society know the change power of sustainable development? And these are the questions to think about, and I believe that adjustment is possible. What's the opinion of the participants, please?
So I would, answer your question and also the comments that you had made, about corruption at the highest level. Yeah. So if I use my same analogy, the wolves have gone into the shepherd's home. So they've even bought most of our politicians. So it's not like, I think even the UN Joint Inspection Unit has been working on, certain elements in terms of whistleblowing mechanisms, conflict of interest reports, and I think that's perhaps trickling down towards at the government level. And I think government levels also have an interest to tackle corruption, and that could also be done through civil society watchdog organizations. So that's a whole challenge on democracy itself. So So we might end up in, like the gentleman from Global Compact said that some countries have such corrupt governments that they own all the business. So maybe we have to accept they are no longer governments, but they have become something else. But we can't put our finger on it yet. But that's a whole challenge of the democratic process. Now, coming back to your point about data collection, of course, it is not an easy task. But gradually, we are all getting there. I mean, today, Facebook can data collect much more about us than we could have ever imagined. So by getting the technologies right, we can actually support data collection. And the award mechanism that I'm proposing is to give the award based on the data which is provided. So the data which is provided in a structured format, that is, perhaps in a results-based framework that a jury can then define if those data is valuable to get an award. And that incentive to get an award and to be recognized will also instigate public sector and in partnership with academia to actually work on the data collection aspects as well. And even for governments, it would be very interesting and very important to ensure that we know what is going on, how much wealth is created, how many people are being excluded, how do we know if people are not left behind, how do we know that what worked in one city can then be replicated into other cities, what worked in one municipality in other municipalities. So if we cannot measure, we cannot achieve. So we must learn to measure. Perhaps like an old Russian saying was, we have to measure 7 times and cut once, So we have to work on the data aspects. And thankfully, we live in the data revolution right now. So we can achieve that. Yeah.
Mr. Delgado had a very short comment to make.
Yeah, thank you, Beverlee. Yeah, I have to make a short comment about this analogy about wolves and business, because I really think that one of the differentiations of this SDG with some other programs like the Millennium Goals and so on, it is that it incorporates businesses as a part of the solution. So, like being a wolf, it doesn't look like a part of the solution, but being a problem. And I don't think this analogy is somehow quite right, and I think incorporating business as we are into this agenda will help to achieve it, and not the opposite. I need to say so.
I think we're just about out of time, and I've been asked to make an announcement right outside the doors. You might have noticed there's a table out there, and it is a special exhibition of Water, What If? Artistic Photography exhibition by Bruno Tofano. And this is sponsored by the conference, and this is something that please take a look at the various photography that is outside the door. And I believe we are out of time because we have to change for the 3 o'clock session. So I thank you very, very much for your questions. I thank the panel. This has been a wonderful discussion. I'm sorry not everyone had an opportunity to ask the questions they wanted, but maybe you can see people at some other time during the conference. So thank you very much.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.